Thank you to everyone for coming. We started on this quest about a year ago at Ann Archer's request to try to determine what might be done with styrofoam in a proper way. And I made many phone calls and did a lot of different contacts and eventually reached the Dart Company in Plant City. And I didn't have all the information I needed and assumed that that was the only place handling Dart products. But I have found since then that there's an office in Deerfield Beach. And today we've been blessed with Matt O'Brien coming. He's a district Dart sales representative. And Matt has a lot of things to tell us about styrofoam.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. And Ann, I really appreciate you getting this group together. And really the reason why I'm thankful is too many times today, people grab on to kind of a bumper sticker slogan and, foam bad or plastic bad, paper good, and really have no concept of what the underlying facts surrounding it is. So I'm going to do this a little bit different than just the disposal of foam, so to speak. What I want to do is give you a little background on disposable cups in general as an example, but also the Dart Company, and then also the actual facts, environmental facts surrounding polystyrene foam and all of that. So I really appreciate you being there. I would, however, before we get started, given the circumstances the folks in the greater Houston area are facing right now, if we could take a moment of silence and just say some prayers for those folks, because they need it. Okay, thank you. Is Joe Mallon here by chance from Dining Services? No, okay. I was kind of hoping he'd be here. But at any rate, now that's okay. I can follow up with him, and as I understand, this is being videotaped, so perhaps he can join in and view that and gain some information. A little background, where disposable cups came from was back in the early 1900s when we had an influenza epidemic, and at the time, it was common to just have local troughs or buckets with a ladle in it. People would just take a drink of water out of that, and obviously they realized that wasn't a very sanitary thing and was aiding in the spread of the disease. So the disposable cup was developed for that sort of thing. And for about 20, 30 years, it was basically a form in some way or another of a paper cup. And in about the early mid-50s, the Dart family had been playing with several different materials, and expanded polystyrene came along, and they started playing with this stuff, and they thought, geez, this paper cup is so involved to produce and so energy inefficient. Can't we come up with a better mousetrap? And they did. So a couple of things that I want to set as a background is, number one, the biggest myth out there is that a landfill is a compost facility. It is not. A landfill is an entombment of garbage. The modern landfill developed after the Marshall Plan rebuild of Europe, where we discovered a high correlation between open pit garbage and disease and water table contamination. We developed the modern landfill, which is basically a cement-lined basin, ironically lined in plastic to make it waterproof. Garbage is filled in. After the garbage is piled in and filled in and the pile is complete, ironically, they cover it in plastic again to cut off most of the oxygen and so forth. To protect the plastic from breaking down, they put dirt on top of it so the UV won't break down the plastic. And then to keep the dirt from washing away, they put sod on it, and then that holds the whole mound together. People will ask, well, what about it lasting 1,000,000 years, foam or something like that? The reality is nobody's been around that long. EPS foam has not been around that long. But the reality is, even if it's like a rock, that's the best thing we can put in a landfill, is something that is inert and non-reactive, okay? So the modern landfill is designed to cut off all oxygen, sunlight, and water so that nothing breaks down. God forbid a little does break down as it's being covered over. They put in methane pipes and so forth. At our Lithonia plant in Pennsylvania, we have 17 plants nationwide. They actually use the methane gas off of a nearby landfill to run the steam generators that actually form the cups through a steam chest molding process that's extremely efficient. What I wanted to show you first of all was the biggest misconception about a paper cup. I've got your standard foam cup. You might call it the Dunkin' cup, for lack of a better description. And this could represent Starbucks. This is actually the Breakers Hotel News and Gourmet cup. What I did was, in order to show you how much plastic is actually in a paper cup, there's actually more plastic in a paper cup than there is in a foam cup. What you do is you take this cup, you boil it for about 20 minutes, and that will loosen all of the glue along the seams and the glue that holds this plastic liner that you see here to the paper in the cup. So even if you considered switching away from foam to go to a paper cup, you're going to end up with more plastic in the landfill, okay? Because it's two materials, it renders it unrecyclable. If you put this through the paper recycling process, this stuff right here clogs the pulp screen and creates a big mess for their recycling of paper. They have to shut the machine down, clean it, and actually throw a lot of paper away instead of recycling it. So that is not a real viable option. What's interesting too is that the performance of a foam cup doesn't require a Java jacket or anything like that. People will put that on to keep their hands from burning in a cup like this. But the reality is, that's only addressing one part of it, and that is your hand burning. What it's not addressing is that everything you put in this cup is rapidly assuming room temperature at a very rapid rate. With a foam cup, you don't need that because it's insulated. And what's unique about the foam cup is that it insulates, that it takes very little energy to produce this cup. You basically take polystyrene beads. They're expanded in a steam chest and shot out of a mold multiple per second. With these, it takes minutes for the process. You start by crafting the paper so that it's smooth and acceptable to the touch. It doesn't look like, wood or something like that. So they use a lot of chemicals to treat the paper. Then you have to apply a plastic layer to it. Then you have to cut it out, roll the rim, put glue on the seams. You have to put a plug on the bottom. You have to roll the rim, everything else. So it's also not very efficient to make, and that's really the reason why it costs at least 2 to 3 times as much than a foam cup, is just because this is so darn efficient. Some other things to consider. Are some of the alternatives to foam. I cited Breakers Hotel because they're a great example of companies that have been running around the country and offering their insight and expertise, supposedly, on how to become green as a resort, for example, or a golf course. And the first thing they'll tell you is, well, you have to get rid of the foam. You can't, Breakers was using foam to-go trays. Well, you can't use that. So what did they do? They came in, and they switched them all to this because it's not foam. And it sounds really great. Thank God we finally got away from foam. There it is. Well, if you look carefully, it has a PS code on it. That means polystyrene, okay? The difference between this and this is EPS foam, expanded polystyrene. This is DI, sheet-fed polystyrene. And what it means is they just went from this to using 5 times the amount of the same plastic, not offering the insulation that this does, and they're green certified. It's done deal. I'm a greenie. I'm a tree-hugging guy, and everything's beautiful. Another example, Hallandale Beach proposed banning foam. What's interesting about that is that instead of having as much time as I do here today, they gave me 3 minutes to cite my case on why we shouldn't ban foam in Hallandale Beach. I started with their first line in the bill proposal, which is, we're banning this because, number one, foam is unrecyclable. So in 3 minutes, I don't have much time, I showed them examples of recycled foam made into other products, and I brought them Crush Recycling from North Miami Beach, who considers the foam recycling such a valuable commodity to him, the recycled foam, that he was willing to collect it for free and recycle it for them, because he can turn around and he can sell it to people who make like plasticized wood. And I don't know if you can see this. This is actually a piece of a picture frame, and if you touch it, you can feel that it's got a different feel from wood. It's lightweight, but it's waterproof, it's strong, everything else. More importantly, this type of material is used in decking and docks, so that instead of having to cut down trees every 10 years to replace our decking and docks, we can use plasticized wood made from recycled foam. Most of the off-the-shelf reading glasses you get at the local pharmacy, those are EPS recycled foam. Your CD covers that holds little CDs in it, that's all made from recycled EPS foam. So anyway, that was my first point. The second point was, what I found ironic is on the dais, you had one guy at one end, Dunkin' Donuts, the other person at the other end with a Starbucks, and then all of them had these drinking water cups. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I had to say something about it, and I said, do you realize that you're banning this, and yet you're in favor of these? So I showed him the paper and the plastic and how much plastic's in the paper. I said, but take a look at your drinking cups. Turn them over, and what's the code you see underneath there? And what you'll notice is it is a PS number 6. That's polystyrene. It's the same material as this, but this contains 5 to 6 times the amount of the same plastic. And you want to ban this, but this is okay. Why? Thirdly, what I did was I introduced the compostable cups. Just so you know, Dart did buy Solo, so now we have all the alternatives and everything else, and you might say, why am I talking about this? Why don't I just sell them this 5 times more expensive cup and make more for the company? Because we don't feel that that is right, not to make a sale based on facts. There's reasons for using things like this, but not in most situations. So it's a full disclosure type of thing. Well, they were quite shocked to find out this was the case. But more importantly, I took this stuff, the compostable, I took these, I even took bagasse fiber trays made from sugarcane, and I took all of these products. I even included this, because this is not being banned either, and I put all of these in a big tub of water, and I brought it in a Tupperware for the presentation, and when I put it up on held it up, every one of these had sunk to the bottom. This is the only one floating on the top. And I asked them, I said, you might think this is a ban on foam, and this is really what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is reducing waste in our waterways and our environment in general. So with these products, you can see, with all the water we have around us down here in Hallandale or Pompano or wherever we are in the little Venice of Southeast Florida, the reality is this all ends up on the bottom, choking the reef system, the ecology. It's out of sight, but it's not out of mind. The foam, you throw it in the water, and it's as easily recoverable as the weeds we tractor off the beach each morning, that the golf clubs take the algae off their ponds. And so it's pretty interesting. A good example was Woodfield Country Club, who was my first CARE recycling program. CARE stands for Cups Are Recyclable. And it's a DART program we instituted for people that wanted to leave foam because they felt it was bad throwing it away. We offered them a recycling program which saved them money over going to something like this, which doesn't even work anyway. So Woodfield Country Club moved from foam to these cups, and he was ready to pay 5 times as much, suffer the slings and arrows of his bottom line. Who cares? I'll just do it. Then he discovered that because people couldn't stand the heat of the cup and it wasn't insulating, they'd take 2 cups. So now he's spending 10 times the amount. Then I asked him on the final time there, I said, if you have any concern, about foam, this, everything else, just talk to your ball diver, the guy that goes down in your ponds and takes up the balls and everything, and you ask him, what does he see more of in his pond? Does he see more plastic liners from paper cups, garbage bags that are all nestling on the bottom, choking off the ecosystem of your pond? Or do you see foam on the bottom? Well, the reality is foam can't be on the bottom because it floats. So, at any rate, that was kind of a rhetorical question, and all said and done, they did convert, in 2011, they converted back to foam. They also picked up our care recycling program, which is basically a glorified compactor for foam. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but it's just a little machine that you toss the foam cups in the hopper on the top. The machine compresses it and presses it into a billet out the bottom that they can put a bag around. Then we come by once a month and pick up the foam and recycle it. What was interesting was in 2012, in the Country Club Managers Association of America, they won a first place in the environmental section out of 6,000 entries for switching to foam and taking more than 1 million cups out of the waste stream. And I mean, that was, you could have knocked me over with a feather, because with all the stuff that I go up against and the people that get so militant when I even try to explain the facts. I had Hallandale Beach accusing me of, I must have come from big tobacco. Was I the guy that was defending all the chemicals they were putting in and killing all the Americans? Were you the guy at Love Canal that kept the residents there longer than they should have been, and attacking me personally? And I just laughed. I said, I feel sorry for you because you're attacking me personally, and I don't know you from Adam. The reality is you're blinded by your emotion over the facts, and it's that simple. Plastics in general have done more to save the environment than any single product that I can think of. If you think of all the weight it's taken out of our vehicles, that increases our miles per gallon. If you think of all of the fuel that is not wasted hauling around glass bottles of milk and soda and that sort of thing, IV bottles, and hospitals used to use the rubber tubing and so forth. Now they use a single-use, disposable, sterile system that has saved more lives than you can count. What's interesting is plastics was actually developed by the Rockefeller family, Standard Oil. Ooh, Standard Oil, the villain. Well, the reality is the discovery of petroleum oil did more to save the whales than all of the Greenpeace organizations combined. And you might ask, why? The reality is, before we discovered oil and that we could refine kerosene out of it, a large part of our lanterns were lit with whale oil, where literally we would kill a whale only for its blubber to harvest its oil and leave its carcass floating off, almost to the point of extinction. So Rockefeller started distilling this stuff, started with kerosene. I think the next was maybe gasoline, something like that. The problem was he ended up with all of these leach ponds with all of this goo in it from this distillate he didn't use. You know, he's got his kerosene and gasoline, and he didn't look at it and say, oh my God, what am I doing to Mother Earth? He's a capitalist. He said, I want to do what the Native Americans do with the buffalo. They use absolutely every part of it. So he brought in a bunch of scientists to play with his goo and his leach ponds, and Dow Chemical was formed, polymer science was born, and what it's done positively for the environment cannot be understated. There have been certain plastic types used in certain applications that we have found are not very friendly or wise. But, you know, we learn from our mistakes. I remember my uncle telling me about when he used to go to the shoe store, they used to put their foot right in the x-ray and get their foot x-rayed right there. And the rads they were being exposed to were just, it was unreal. But we go through those sorts of things in life, but let's not throw the baby out for the bathwater, or however that saying goes. I think I got that a little mixed up. But what I really appreciate is that you guys have all shown up to actually, you know, learn a little more about all of this. What I do want to touch on, too, is some of the things that have come up recently. It came up at Hallandale Beach, and that was somebody got up and for their 3 minutes said, I read a study where 100% of the population shows signs of styrene in their systems. So we have to ban this because we're ingesting styrene. And I'm thinking, okay. So I got up and had to rebut it, and I said, do you believe that there's a difference between polystyrene and styrene? Do you know where styrene comes from? And what was interesting was I just found out that they basically were taking a root word, attaching it to polystyrene, and considering it all bad. Here's the reality is, styrene is a naturally occurring plant substance. One scientist said to me one time, in layman's terms, if you're concerned about drinking coffee out of a foam cup, your best alternative is to dump the coffee out and eat the foam cup. You would be ingesting less styrene because coffee beans has some of the highest concentration of styrene known. There is one item that I would say most of us probably really enjoy that contains even more styrene than coffee beans, and those are strawberries. And it's not because they're out there spraying down with styrene for some reason. It's a naturally occurring plant substance, and it actually makes sense that we're able to polymerize styrene out of crude oil because crude oil comes from plant life, millions of years baked, okay? So it's all natural. You know, once you start distilling it, I don't think you call it organic or natural anymore, but still, that's where it all comes from. So people will make these little ties together, and I don't quite understand why. I've often thought about, where did this whole thing, this negativity about plastics come from? And the only thing I can think of is a movie I saw when I was a really young kid called The Graduate. And Dustin Hoffman comes up, he's resisting the man and the whole machine and having to go to school and get a tie and get a good career. He just wants to drive around in his convertible and listen to Seals and Crofts and marry his girl, you know. And the guy takes him aside, son, while he's drinking his scotch and stogie and smoking Dustin Hoffman out and everything else. Plastics, kid, plastics. That's the future, plastics. Well, only natural, anyone who saw the movie probably had the impression that plastic's bad, you know, paper good or what have you. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Yep. Still Simon and Garfunkel. Thank you very much. All right. I hope that doesn't take away from what I've presented. I'm not an audiophile, but yes. Oh, the question was, it was Simon and Garfunkel, not Seals and Crofts.
You showed a pamphlet about a machine that squashes it and recycles it.
Correct.
Is that available? I mean, could we have that here at John Knox, or where
Yes,
would
you
it
could.
be?
You could. What it is it's a, this is probably a better picture of it. Wait a minute.
Wait, I have another question.
It's a little larger picture of it. Yeah, there's a lease associated with this. It's about $300 a month. You lease this machine from us. We put it on your premises by your cardboard compactor. You go out and buy or use our receptacles for collecting the foam. The foam is then collected much like your aluminum cans and glass, and it's put into a separate area for pickup. I don't know exactly how your garbage works, if it's centralized for pickup by Waste Management or they literally drive house to house, I'm not sure. But if there is a central area where you collect any of these items, the same could be done with the foam, and it could be collected and recycled. I will say, though, even if you don't recycle it, it's a lot better for the environment, and I'll show you why. A couple of little slides here that I had. The foam cup weighs 60% less than a foam cup. A foam cup weighs 60% less than the equivalent paper cup. The average plastic-coated paper cup produces 180% more waste by weight than an average foam cup. An average plastic-coated paper cup and corrugated sleeve then produces 380% more waste by weight than an average foam cup. And then finally, an average plastic-coated paper cup with a corrugated sleeves requires about 45% more energy to produce than a foam cup. So whether you recycle it or not, it's still a better environmental alternative. I would certainly encourage you to pursue the possibilities of doing our CARE program. We'd be more than happy to provide the information to all of you. What I would recommend too is that everyone and anyone, tell your family, relatives, and friends to contact their local municipalities and counties and tell them to start curbside recycling like they have done in more progressive cities like LA County, like Toronto, both of which had banned foam at first. And that's really the key to me. That's what I want to see happening, so that I can put my egg cartons, my meat trays, I can put all my electronics packing, all of that foam, and get it recycled. Trust me, I don't want those things blowing down my street any more than you do.
Right now, I take my foam to Publix to recycle it because they have bins outside. I mean, do they actually really take it somewhere and recycle it, or do they just dump it somewhere?
Actually, DART was the company that had partnered with Publix to do the recycling, and I think that was the case up until about 10 or 8 years ago. And then we started doing so much of our own recycling, they found another company to do it. I can't speak to the validity of how much of that is really recycled. And you make a good point, because I've learned from my garbage collection that, oh yeah, the aluminum processor was down, it's all going to the landfill for the next 2 weeks anyway. Or the price of aluminum has fallen so much, it's cheaper to just pull it out of the ground than it is to try to sell recycled. So they put it on the side, they hold it till the market price goes up, and then if they have to wait too long and they run out of space, it starts going in the landfill. So that's a good question.
Can you give us a little refresher on the numbers on the bottom of the plastic, what they mean, and which ones are recyclable? Inside the triangle, the little number.
Well, they're all pretty much recyclable, whether it's in this case, polystyrene is a number 6, which is recyclable. I do know that I've looked at my solid waste management guidelines, and there's a lot of things that, even though they're considered a recycled symbol, like we recycle number 3, for example. The reality is it's not all 3. In other words, you might find some of that same plastic on molded around cardboard on a kid's toy or something like that. When it's in that orientation, they won't recycle it. Paper, they recycle all paper. Well, they'll tell you that if it's a pizza box and it still has food in it, they won't recycle it. It has to be relatively clean. Another example is, even though that code, what did I use, number 3, I'm trying to think of, if it's not in a bottle form with a cap, they don't want to recycle it. So just because my ice cube tray that cracked has the same symbol as the bottle of soda, it doesn't mean that they're going to recycle it. They'll only recycle, if you contact the Solid Waste Authority here in Pompano Beach, which I have, it's got to be a bottle. It can't be other forms of stuff. And I think it's the consistency of the plastic itself. I do want to touch on one thing, and that is, I talked about the compostable cup. The reason they consider this compostable, even though there are no commercial composting facilities anywhere around here, the plastic liner in here is made from PLA plastic. And if you buy a PLA clear plastic cup, that has created all sorts of problems with recycling as well, because when they come across this PLA product in a batch of otherwise normal plastic that looks like the same plastic, they have to throw the whole batch out because it's got the corn-based product in it anyway. So, yes.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Compostable. Compostable, what does that mean for us? We have our products here. The majority of them are compostable. We just put it in the landfill?
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. It all goes to a landfill, and it just takes up more space than other alternatives.
And we're paying more for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite simple. You put a green leaf on it, and everybody feels good about paying 2 to 5 times as much. But no, if you look at what actually happens to it, there's no difference.
Okay.
Actually, there is. If it ends up in an incinerator, ironically, because foam is a derivative of natural gas, they use natural gas in clean burning furnaces, because if you put paper in there, which absorbs moisture, if you ever burnt a newspaper, it's very sooty and smoky. So in order to have it burn clean, they have to blast it with natural gas. Ironically, foam burns at exactly the same BTU as natural gas, because that's what it's derived from. So you don't need to blast it. So it burns cleaner than paper. But yeah, it's either going to end up in an incinerator or a landfill, period. There are no compost. But they did have a composting facility, I think, in 1990 in Miami that lasted about 6 months. And if you think Mount Trashmore is a little irritating to or differous downwind, imagine what the compost facility is. In addition to that, the composting facilities I have researched, it's funny because the federal guidelines just put out a new thing for their purchasing that it has to be compostable. 95% of everything they buy has to be compostable. And I asked the question, well, where are the composting facilities? And there's 5 in the state of Washington that I was able to find. And those, I say that because it's kind of ironic, but because it's all everywhere else going to land up in a landfill. But I actually did some research on the composting, and when you look at all the activity involved in composting, I mean, for God, man, put it in a landfill. Really, save us all the labor, human endeavor, energy, because literally you have to create a star chamber laboratory in there for it to compost properly. It's not like food waste or your yard clippings that you put in your compost bin. I made that mistake when PLA first came out with the clear cups, put them in my compost bin. The only thing that's ever happened to it is it cracked and it turned a little pink, but it never disintegrated, much to my chagrin.
I have another question. What you were just talking about, the numbers that are on the bottom of the containers. Is there any way that we can get a list of what number 1 is, number 2 through number 7,
Yeah.
and whether they are recyclable?
Yes, what I could do
Recyclable
is,
or not?
yeah, I can, well, as I explained before, the list of simply the numbers would not be enough to tell you what Solid Waste Authority here in Pompano is going to
That's what I
recycle.
meant, an explanation of each.
Yes, but what I can do is forward you a link to the Solid Waste Authority that describes exactly what I'm talking about. That just because it has that number does not mean they're going to recycle it. It has to be a specific type of plastic, and they refer to it as, if you have any doubt, does it have a lid on it, and is it a bottle? If it's not, we don't want to recycle it. Correct. Number 6. Yeah. We recycle it. They don't recycle it municipally. Every kind of plastic is recyclable in some form. But what I'm getting to, your exact question, can you send me a list so we know what can be recycled? That list I will send you will come from Solid Waste Authority because they can tell you. And it won't be by number. It'll say a number, but it'll have the stipulation, numbers in a bottle form. Not a toy, plastic toy material or tools that you get that, those packages only God himself can open, if you've ever done that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I don't know. I think so. She asked, on water bottles that they do recycle, are the little caps recyclable? I'm not sure. I think they are, but again, I don't work for the Solid Waste Authority, and I don't want to open up her drink to find out what number's under that lid, but I don't know how they handle that, actually.
Actually, that was my question.
I do want to point out, though, that kind of ties into something with our recycling program, and that is just because our foam cups are recyclable doesn't mean the lids and the straws are going to be recyclable, too, so they need to be separated out, just so you know. Go ahead in the back.
Well, I was curious about the lids because for years we have removed the lids, thinking that we were told that they didn't want the lids. And now it's not, and this is basically water bottles. So do you know anything about that? I know.
I don't, but I will go back over the Solid Waste Authority and that list that I found some time ago that had the numbers and stuff. And I would like to see what they say about the lids because now you've got my curiosity up. What I find about the lids that's essential is I squeeze the air out of them so I don't take up as much space in my recycling bin and I can actually fit more in there. And I got to ask a question. Does anyone remember the trash compactors? Whatever happened to them? Wouldn't that be a neat thing to have all our trash compacted before it goes to the, just give it to the trash guys in blocks? Whatever happened to that? Okay, anyway.
Question here.
Bob, can I go first because it has to do with the tops of bottles. I was told that to take off the top, put it in the same container, but take off the top and not leave it on, because when you compact it, it will explode. if
Well,
you
that's
can't
why,
get-
yeah, that's why I said, for me personally, I squeeze the bottle so that I don't have to take out all my recycled plastic, all the time. I just have a little bin. I have paper and plastic, and I just squeeze the water bottle, seal the lid, and put it in, and I can fit more in. If they're all loose, it just takes up a huge, which brought me to that trash compactor story. We had a question right here.
Yes, what is Pompano Beach doing now? I don't, either I missed it or,
Pompano Beach currently will recycle aluminum, some plastics, glass, and pick up your trash. 2 separate trips. I live in Pompano.
yes, and if this is, the styrofoam is going in with your trash, what are they separating it or just going?
It would either go 1 or 2 places. It either goes right into the landfill or they incinerate it. I do not know how they determine what they're going to incinerate and what they're going to put in Mount Trashmore, but I would just say for a rule of thumb, it probably all, most of it goes in the landfill. Just so you know, foam makes up less than 0.5% of the contents of a landfill. Paper makes up more than 40% of a landfill, which I always thought was plastic diapers, but apparently not.
Are the containers that can have the frozen dinners in, is that recyclable, the frozen dinners?
I don't know. It depends on each frozen dinner. If it's a frozen dinner that you are putting in the oven, that's an ovenable container, and it should have one type of clarification on it. But I can tell you it goes back to my solid waste management, which is your solid waste management. Even though that number matches, it doesn't have a lid on it. It's not a bottle. So they don't want to recycle it. But you can check with them. I'll check that list, and I'll get it to Jim, and he can distribute it for you.
Since styrofoam is plastic, why can't we just put styrofoam in the recycle bag?
Because it's a different type of plastic than they approve of. I think there's only 2 or 3 triangular symbol numbers that they do recycle, and it doesn't fall in that category. Historically, there hasn't been a huge market for recycled foam, and that's changing, and they're just not interested in changing their business model to include foam. Why should
It seems
they?
like if it just melted down, it would just be plastic.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So why don't they just do that?
Well, no, actually what we do is we take the compressed foam, we take it back to our plant, we put it in a shredder, and then in a cleaner, and then we bake it. And when we bake it, it creates little plastic beads, hard plastic beads. And those little plastic beads are then given to people who...
Well, we live in very small quarters here, most of us. And now we already have 2 bags to fill. Now we're going to have 3. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I'm not saying that necessarily. As a matter of fact, I'm saying that even if you, to use foam and not recycle it is still more environmentally friendly than using another product to replace it, that whether you recycle it or not, or it wouldn't be recyclable. But, if you're using this or these, the paper, it's not as environmentally friendly as the foam to begin with. If you do decide to recycle it, you're taking on an added expense for the community of $300 a month lease on the machine, and that sort of thing, and the time it takes to collect and sort that sort of thing out. And I'm all in favor of that. But no, I agree with you. There are only so many bins you can have in your house before there are more bins than things to put in the bins.
I would say at John Knox Village, it will require 3 bags, based on what I've observed and researched. 1 for each type. Garbage, glass, and those that we know will be recycled, and then styrofoam, which is presently not being recycled by anybody. Paper would be included in what is recycled.
If I could clarify, a paper is a form of a newspaper, recyclable, yes. A recycling of a paper cup, No, it will not get recycled. It'll get kicked out. And if it doesn't get kicked out, it will clog the pulpers where they do recycle the paper, newspapers, for example.
Jim, if we go with a recycling program and I bring home my nice foam container that I had spaghetti in and it had this nice red meat sauce in it, when you finally try to clear that out, it's kind of ugly as a piece of styrofoam. Is that the kind of styrofoam that would go into a DART recycling?
Yes, absolutely. And the only thing we would request is just try to take the solid waste off of it. You don't have to wash it clean, but a quick rinse under it to make sure that we're not recycling food does make the process cleaner for us, for sure. And it smells a lot better for wherever is all being collected. We do recommend, just as a footnote on that, that there is a power source required power requirements for the densifier, and we also ask that it be near a floor drain, like in a dumpster area, where there is a hose spigot nearby, because periodically you're going to want to rinse out the collection bin at the bottom where it's being compressed to rinse out some of the food material that can accumulate in there and reduce the attraction of vermin and that sort of thing.
Those of us who are able, a lot of us, take our styrofoam to Publix.
Yeah.
And Publix supposedly is recycling it.
Yeah, that's what we talked about over there. I can't speak to how their recycler is handling it now, but we used to be responsible for recycling their foam, I think 8 or 10 years ago, something like that.
Jane?
Is all of the styrofoam that you compact and pick up, is it made into useful items and not buried?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There is a huge market for the recycled pellets, and as I explained, my favorite is selling it to people that make base moldings for your house. So God forbid your house floods, you don't have to replace all your base molding because it will not attract water. It's plasticized. So it's integrated into the wood fiber to make a very strong, lightweight material. Picture frames that. My favorite, as I said, is the decking and dock materials that have to be replaced outside every 5-10 years. You know, cutting down more trees. Well, if you use plasticized wood, that is not the case. The other thing I found interesting was there was a study where they were going around to local parks and doing soil tests. And they found out these high concentrations of arsenic in the soil. And then they noticed that it was isolated to wherever the picnic benches or the park benches were. And then they extrapolated or determined that they used to use the arsenic to pressure treat the wood to preserve it from breaking down and being invaded by termites and that sort of thing. And then when the rains come, it rinses that arsenic down into the soil where our kids are crawling underneath and grabbing their toys and playing in the dirt. Yeah, so again, plasticized wood, none of that.
So you had a question?
Oh, and it kind of ties into the person who was saying, what if it takes 500 million or 1 million years to break down? That's one of the beauties of, well, the same thing with glass and silica. Yeah, it doesn't break down very easily. And what is interesting too, and this is a personal thing, people ask, why do you get into this? You know, why, you know, you're not a scientist necessarily. Why are you so into this? Everybody in our company has heard the same information that I have, but when I take it in, my ears are really big, and I get passionate about it. And you might say, well, of course, you work for that big oil plastic producing company that Dustin Hoffman ran away from. No, the reality is we can sell you any of the other products. The reality is the reason I'm passionate about this is I've lived my whole life seeing examples of oops 20 years later. Example, my grandfather back in the early 70s had a heart attack. They took him off all the dairy products, bacon, all these substitutes he took. So he goes from butter to margarine. 20 years later, we find out the hydrogenated vegetable oil that we converted my grandfather to, it was 5-6 times as bad for him than if he would have just been eating his farm butter. Point 2 was they get rid of all aspirin because they didn't get rid of all aspirin, but all the hospitals and everything else convert, because 0.5% got a little upset tummy from an aspirin. So we convert everybody to Tylenol. Now we've got situations where chronic pain relief users, like Tylenol, are realizing up to 5% liver failure. Well, heck, I'd rather have a little upset tummy than a failing liver, quite frankly. And oops, there's another one. What was the latest one? Well, every day coffee's good or bad, wine is good or bad. I look at I look at Willard Scott and the Smucker's 101-year-old people and everything else, and I'll be damned. I mean, my memory goes back to all of them. I never heard one of them say, you know what? I quit smoking. I started exercising. I watched my cholesterol. I lowered my fat intake. And no, it's a cigar and a shot of bourbon or something crazy like that. Now, that didn't tell me that, wow, I need to smoke a cigar and do a shot of bourbon every day. What it told me is they lived so long because they really didn't worry about it, you know? And now we're worried about every little thing. I mean, we're at the point where we're scared to death before we even do eat anything, you know? So this is one of the reasons why I'm passionate. There's other examples of it that I won't go into. The fact that global sea level rise is affecting Miami, but the oceanfront canal that I live on, the original owner put the KT 1960 on it when the house was built. And that stands for king tide. Why did he do that? Because he wanted to make sure anytime he built his dock, it was going to be above that line. So when the king tide in the fall and in the spring came through, his dock didn't get flooded. It didn't affect the wood on his dock so much. Ironically, I've never seen the water rise above that unless there was a low pressure system by the name of, you know, Wilma, yeah, something like that, or a supermoon does produce a little bit more than that. But it's just ironic to me. And 20 years ago when I moved down here, they referred to the situation in Miami as inundation, which is basically any time you build a canal system, you put dirt in a tidal area behind a seawall. A seawall has to be able to breathe or it collapses. That's why you have those pilings and you do the hydraulic cement patching on those all the time to repair them. So anytime you're in that zone, the tide comes in, it takes a little particulate out from behind the wall. Tide comes in, takes a little bit out. If any of you have lived on an ocean access seawall, you'll notice you start creating these little divots along the wall. Well, that's the particulate being taken out. The only reason in Miami the high rises are not inundated is because they're piled right down to the bedrock. But all of the roadways, all of that stuff is just slowly sinking. And yet, I'm being told the debate is over. And if anyone knows where that tape of the debate is, I'd love to watch it. Because I've researched and researched, and I've never found a place where I can watch the pro and con debate on global warming, you know? I'm sorry, but I was trying to describe why I question these things and why I get so passionate about this. Question, yes.
Oh. What happens to the styrofoam egg cartons that Publix accepts for recycling?
I don't know now, but 8 or 10 years ago, we used to recycle the foam for Publix. I can't speak for the company that recycles it now, but I'm quite confident it's being recycled. Publix is a good company, a good, you know, family-based company, and good moral from my understanding and my appreciation of their history. Now, who knows if that changes or what have you, but it would strike me as, yeah, it gets recycled, and it gets recycled into materials like this, the pen, the CD cases, stuff like that I was talking about. The leasing of the Densifier is $295 a month to lease it. I'm sorry? Yeah, it would be John Knox. Well, that would be up to John Knox to provide that. All we're doing is providing the Densifier so that we can compress it and efficiently take it away for recycling.
No,
The same
that's
place
not-
you hold your newspaper or your plastics now. And that would be something internal for you to do, yeah.
I wanted to ask about the densifier. Approximately how big is that? About the size of a...
It's like 14 feet by 6 feet footprint that you want. This is not going in your house.
Oh,
this
I
is
know
one
that.
unit that is over by your dumpsters.
It's not going in my house.
No, I know. But when you started talking footprint and I saw a little, holy cow, I can't fit that in my, you know.
And I wondered if it should be kept in like a warehouse type, or
No,
can
it can be
kept
outside. Mhm.
Okay, but near a faucet so it can be hosed
Rinsed out. The same way you would do it if you had a cardboard compactor on the premises. It's the
And
same
how
thing.
often?
Once a month.
Okay.
Up to once a month.
I think it's
We will, begrudgingly, reluctantly. And then I got to come back and do my job and show you. Because I'll tell you one thing about Dart is every product that they produce is the best in its class. And I don't mean that facetiously, but you take a clear clamshell, for example. Everybody had one. Most companies would say, yeah, we just need to slap some plastic together, get it to close, and have our own clear clamshell, just like Pactiv does. But we don't work that way. We do focus group testing. We asked, what do you like about it and what don't you like? They said, well, we like that it has the audible bar lock. You can hear it close, you know it's closed, but what we don't like is every time I go to open it, I have to separate my finger from my fingernail to get in there. Then when I go to grab it, I can't hold on to it because my fingers are a little slippery. So we have the open mouth design. We have the texture grip. And then the last thing they said is, why doesn't this preserve food like my Tupperware? Well, the reason is because they don't have a perimeter seal. So we built the perimeter seal all the way around it. So everything we do is better than the competitor's product and will match their price. So there really would be no other reason to use another manufacturer's foam. But I'd like to discuss that on a case-by-case basis. If you think you've got a better mousetrap, show me and I'll show you. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, we'll do that for you.
Okay, I think there are some other meetings that are about to start. We should probably wind it up here.
I want to thank all of you, especially Ann and Jim, for showing up, but specifically all of you taking a specific interest in your community and the issues as opposed to just, yeah, I heard that was bad, let's go with it. Yeah, or that's good. Don't be part of the herd.
Is this? Yeah, this is the one. Okay, so Building and Grounds Department will check further on the CARE program. Thank you for coming.